Okay, so it's time to talk about Battlefield 6, or Battlefield 2021. We're still not quite sure what the name of this next game will be. Last night, EA had an earnings call, and whilst that might sound really boring, historically, it has been a place that EA drops hints to their investors about what they can expect from the company moving forwards. And for 2021, that includes a new Battlefield game. And we did get some interesting information from the call last night, so we're going to cover that off in today's video. I will of course be covering the new Battlefield game as it's revealed and we go through that marketing cycle and eventually released later in 2021. So if you're interested in that kind of content, then consider subscribing so you don't miss any more news videos. I'm just going to try and cover as much as I can moving closer to reveal and beyond towards release. Okay, so let's go through the earnings call and pick out all the elements that mentioned Battlefield. The first point comes from EA CEO Andrew Wilson in his prepared remarks at the beginning of the call. Battlefield was called out as part of EA's plans for financial year 2022, that's from April 2021 to March 2022, stating that Battlefield will return to all-out military warfare. The game takes full advantage of the next-generation platforms to bring massive, immersive battles to life with more players than ever before. Featuring maps with unprecedented scale, the next edition of Battlefield takes all the destruction, player agency, vehicle and weapon combat that the franchise is known for, and elevates it to another level. Now that's a pretty confident opening statement about the next Battlefield game. We've heard EA make these kind of statements before for other Battlefield games on these kinds of earnings calls, and that's because they're talking to their investors, and they want to instill confidence to those investors about their products that are coming up. But me and you, most of the people watching this video, we're players of this franchise and these games that they're creating, and so that statement has me quite excited. A truly next-gen Battlefield game taking the scale of combat up a notch, more players than ever before, bigger maps, more destruction. It does sound very enticing. The mention also of the franchise returning to all-out military warfare. Andrew Wilson definitely stopped short of saying the game will be a modern shooter. That was a very selective phrase he used, but the word returning being used both after Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5 being historical conflict-based shooters, that says to me with like 99.9% certainty that the next Battlefield game will be a modern warfare title, and I couldn't be happier with that. This means a huge arsenal of weapons and vehicles, hopefully, much larger than we saw in Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5, and perhaps a customization or loadout system with a lot more depth, with attachments and add-ons that really change how those weapons and vehicles behave. That's been missing from the franchise for quite some time. I think Battlefield 4 back in 13, that was the last Battlefield game to have proper weapon customization. Battlefield 1 had this really limited variant system, and I think that was implemented because of the time period that was being depicted by the game, of course, World War I, and they had limited weaponry during that time. And then Battlefield 5 had these skill trees that only really let you use the weapons in one way or another. I wasn't a huge fan of that system. So yeah, the franchise has been crying out for more player control in this department at least for the best part of 8 years, which is a long time. So here's hoping we get some better customization or even a loadout system with Battlefield 6. Then to touch on the mentions of greater scale, we're getting more players than ever before, and we're getting bigger maps on an unprecedented scale. Battlefield has always been about large-scale combined arms warfare, but it's been limited to 64 players for almost the entire lifetime of the franchise. And Battlefield 6, Battlefield 2021, it could be the game to sort of break out of that mold. The natural step forward, I think, would be 128 players, and that's kind of the rumor that's been floating around for a long time, so you'd have 64 players per faction fighting it out on maps that could, potentially based on the doubling of players, be twice as large as maps we've seen in the past. However, I wouldn't be surprised to see DICE maybe go for the 100 player mark, 50v50. In the past, consoles have limited what Battlefield can do on certain platforms. Battlefield 3 on the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, those consoles only supported 12v12 combat despite introducing some of the largest maps ever in Battlefield at that point. The PC version of Battlefield 3 could support the full 64-player experience, but the consoles they didn't have the bandwidth to go any higher, which was a bit disappointing. Now, do the Xbox Series X and the PS5, do they have the bandwidth to go all the way up above 64 players? Because Battlefield 1 and 5 supported 64 players on the previous generation of consoles. Well, based on Andrew Wilson's comments, yes. But how much higher are we going here? These new consoles have been compared to mid to high-end level PCs at the moment, so I think it's probably realistic to assume that they could handle 128 players at a time, all running around, shooting things, blowing things up, dip, potato chipping enemy players, whatever. But you have to consider the gameplay side of that as well. Just doubling the player count, that's going to have an absolutely massive effect on the gameplay experience. DICE has to take into account what another 64 players on a single map at any one time could do to the gameplay. I'm sure DICE, no doubt, will be taking that into account, but it's going to be interesting to see how they handle extra players in a Battlefield game for the very first time. Now, Wilson did give another short statement about Battlefield 6, saying that the DICE team is focused and they're ahead of their internal development milestones. The game is going to be revealed in the spring of 2021, so maybe only a couple of months from now, and the game will launch in the 2021 holiday season, and this usually means around the October, November, December time. Battlefield games are traditionally released in October, Battlefield 5 released in November after a month's delay. I wouldn't be surprised at a late October release for the next Battlefield game. Now, this can be viewed as good news, I think, the team being ahead of where they plan to be in terms of development, but it is a statement that I feel is being put out there to try and steer the conversation away from previous issues. Battlefield 5, as we know, it had its issues, and one of those was far too little development time. It resulted in some seriously underbaked ideas, this weird conflict of features, and in general just a messy launch, and a very blank sense of what the game was actually supposed to be. By stating the team is ahead of development milestones for the next Battlefield game, that puts out a feeling that the team is confident in what they're building, they're pushing ahead with their vision, and they're nearly ready to show the world what the next Battlefield game would be. Now, as a player, I appreciate that comment, but I feel as though it's a comment being made to try and give players confidence that this Battlefield project isn't going to be like the last one. And I really, really hope that's the case, but the proof, as always, is in the pudding. We're going to have to wait and see what this game is like when it launches to really know if this statement is true at this point in time. Now, one final comment, this time made by CFO Blake Jorgensen. He said, "The Battlefield team is doing an incredible job. They're way ahead of where they were in prior product cycles, on track for their earliest feature complete in franchise history." This is kind of a continuation of what Andrew Wilson said, but feature complete ahead of schedule, that would represent a good result for DICE. Now, I was part of behind closed door sessions for Battlefield 5 and for Battlefield 1, and I can tell you at the same stage before release of both of those games, Battlefield 1 was a long way ahead of Battlefield 5. If DICE is in a position close to where they were with Battlefield 1 at this point in the development cycle, then I think we will be on for a solid launch of the game. But again, it is worth stating that there's no real way to know what state Battlefield 6 is currently in. The only way we'll know is when it launches, or we have some kind of beta test where we can actually get our hands on it and we can work that out for ourselves. Now, just a quick note before we end. It's been about 6 months since I last made a Battlefield video on this channel. I was mainly a Battlefield creator all the way up to March, April 2020, and then I switched over to Warzone because Battlefield 5, it just wore me down as a player and a content creator. The game was really poor from launch to the moment it was cancelled, and being a content creator for that game, it was just not fun. Let me put it that way. I needed a break from Battlefield. But that break has given me a chance to really clear my head of all that negativity of the last game, and it gave me a chance to play some other games, and I've had a lot of fun over the last year or so not playing Battlefield. But I'm ready to go for this next title. I'm excited, but I'm remaining cautious, and I think you probably should as well. History teaches us that Battlefield games often go overly ambitious with their marketing, and then they sometimes disappoint at launch with a bunch of issues that crop up. There's no way to say that that couldn't happen again, but equally there's no way to say that we couldn't have another Battlefield 1 situation where we have an almost flawless launch, and the game is a technical masterpiece, so I'm remaining cautiously optimistic. But I love Battlefield, and I'm ready to see what DICE has in store for 2021, and the reveal is just around the corner. Thanks very much for watching today. Hope you learned something. Hope you're excited about Battlefield 6. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and I'll catch you all in the next one.